Mr. Whipple, please don't squeeze the Charmin.
How many licks does it take to get to the Tootsie Roll center of a Tootsie Pop? I'm not going to try it.
Where's the beef?
You're listening to the Creative Leverage Podcast, and here's your host, Todd Kinley.
Let's get started, dude. I'm so excited that you said yes to this. A little preamble for me is in 2000 or 2001 when you helped me, and I was thinking about this today, that when I look back on who I was and what capabilities I had, I just, like, you were a child. I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, back in 2000, I was a child, and yet I'd put all my savings into this agency and was working with these teams, and I desperately needed guidance. And when I came to you, it was every second I was with you was a sacrifice of time, because I just didn't have time to do it. But it's been, I think, the most valuable thing working with you that I've done in my career. I still to this day remember where I was in my, way back in 2000 in the agency, where I was standing when I had these epiphanies that I learned through working with you. I think over your career, you probably get that, a lot. And so I'm really happy to talk to you today, especially since, soon you're going to have kind of this meeting where you're going to talk about the things you've learned over your career. For me, it's kind of a hobby. I just love learning about myself. I love learning about how to better, achieve things and help others achieve things. So I've got kind of a list of, questions for you. And the one that comes to mind the most is a similar question that I had for my therapist that I've been working with almost for 20 years too. And it's a pretty simple question is, what surprised you over the years when you first started, and now you look back of all the things that you've done and seen and learned, because he had some epiphanies of I didn't expect that when I started in this career, but this is just generally how people are. What's something that surprised you from when you started?
I'm going to answer your question, but I want to be clear that a motivated learner merely needs to be pointed in the direction that appears to be the place of use of their most potential. But an unmotivated learner, it really wouldn't matter, Todd, if you had been given glorious platinum insights that was put in front of you and you went, "Muh," but you did not. And I think of the surprises for me in my career are the number of times that I've sat with an executive or would-be executive or a manager who gets the insights. We go through the data. We review where they've been in their career. We even talk about where they want to land in their career. We look at what is it going to take to get from where they are to where they want to be, and spectacularly choose to do nothing. And it just boggles my mind the number of times I've been in that situation where I thought the coaching process was going really well. The person was seemingly engaged, and when we came to a consensus about what's going to be essential for their next steps, the motivation, the commitment, the energy to cross that bridge from knowing to doing simply wasn't there. And whenever that happens, it's a shock to me, because I don't understand. Why would you invest money and resources and time and energy in a process and then come to a conclusion to which you agree and then choose to do nothing?
And that was their money. That wasn't just corporate money. That was money they
both.
invested in.
It seems both. It's happened in both contexts.
Do you think that's a, do you think there's that self-awareness has, because what I find is, even with people that I work with, they have an maybe a not clear understanding of where their value is, or what they're good at or what they're not good at. They have this story that they've written that this is the way it is. And then even if they agree with you, then they go back and they say, well, I'm really this, or I'm really that, and I don't really need to pay attention to that stuff that Roger and I worked on.
I've thought about this a long time. And if we look at parallels within, let's say, healthcare, we know that roughly 35 to 37% of folks under the care of a physician are compliant, which means the vast majority, 2/3 people, are not. Let's take, and here's a concrete example. When I had knee replacement surgery, I had been told by my friends who were surgeons, by others who had gone through it, be religious, absolutely religious about doing your rehab, and you'll have full functionality of your knee. And that's what I did, and that is true. I have more capacity than I did before I had knee surgery. Well, while I was doing rehab, I'll never forget, this woman came in and she was in excruciating pain. Oh my goodness, the wails. And I noticed the staff, they were responsive, but they did not show alarm. And when the woman left, I said to my physical therapist, I said, I'm really puzzled about the way people responded to her. They were attentive, but there was clearly an officiousness about it. And he laughed and he said, this is the 5th surgery she's had, and she refuses to do the rehab.
Oh.
Her leg never gets better, and she goes back and has another kind of corrective surgery. It will never get better until she does the rehab. Let me translate that into working with a CEO. Not long ago, I worked with a CEO in which we used a 360 tool that requires all raters to indicate on a 5-bucket range what are the highest and lowest effective behaviors for this person. Now, that doesn't say you're giving them a 5 and that's high and a 1 and that's low in an absolute fashion. Simply says, based on my experience with this person, he tends to do these things extremely well. Those are 5s. And these things not as evident, not so well. These are 1s. He gave himself, and he has the same limitations. He can only put so many in the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 bucket. He gave himself a 5 on a behavior that 12 people, when they put their order of where that behavior belonged, averaged a 1.5, which meant 12 people, not 1, not 2, not 3, but 12 people said, this behavior is amongst your lowest effective behaviors. It blew his mind. He couldn't believe it. He said, I don't understand this. I'm a 5 in this behavior. I said, you're a 5 in the narrative in your head on this behavior. But in terms of what you demonstrate to the world, this is what people see and what people experience. And there were several behaviors similarly. And we looked at it, and what I would say to you is that when those kinds of moments happen, I've observed that an executive either goes, "Oh, holy mackerel, tell me more. What in the world do I need to do to attend to this? And I clearly want to be effective at whatever the behavior is." Or a defense script. They don't know me. They don't understand the situation I'm in. I have received feedback in previous roles that were different. Any cascade of defenses tells you this person cannot hear the message and is unwilling to pause enough to consider that 12 people who are at different levels of the organization, from the boardroom to 3 levels down in the organization, have said, "I work with you enough to see this behavior does not occur frequently, and when it does, it's not particularly effective." Now, I'd like to say that's uncommon. It is not uncommon. And the more, unfortunately, uncommon response is what I would call a growth mindset response that goes, "Holy wow, I really missed this. I need to really review my behavior. I need to take a look at the situations that I find myself in. And what do I need to do to be more effective?" There was a recent mega study report on, can we predict leadership effectiveness and predict individuals in their management career and them becoming effective leaders. And the 3 factors that came up, while no surprise, it was fascinating to see across multiple disciplines of looking at leadership behavior. The 3 factors were having to do with the ability to communicate a vision in a way that people that you need to make that a reality, they understand it. They have the vision, it's compelling. A second factor was the interpersonal savviness of the leader, such that all of the people working with the individual felt that they were being inspired to achieve greatness, as opposed to being compelled or coerced to do something. And of course, the third one, which again is no surprise, is the way in which the leader executes on the plan and how that leader involves others in the execution of that plan. So vision, relationships, execution. Same story. We know that's true. Every single time it gets studied, we come back and say, at the bottom, at the end of the day, what is it that matters?
Mm-hmm.
Vision, relationships, and the capacity to move things to execution and completion. And I would say that works in personal development. Do I have a vision for myself? Do I understand where I am, who I am, what I am in the context in which I find myself? Am I clear about where I want to go? Am I utilizing the relationships around me to understand what they see as capable, possible, potential for me? And do I develop a plan and execute on it to get from here to there? And it's the same.
There is a certain amount of tenacity that you have to have when, I think when we did our work, and we did 2 different rounds. We did one fairly recently, but we did one 20 years ago. You're like, what are your goals? And then, these are your strengths, these are your weaknesses. And then here's the evidence of what people say about you to highlight your weaknesses. And then you've got to be able to, swallow your pride or get mad and get over it, or whatever process you need to go through to get past that wall. The first wall is, like you said, defensive. No, I'm not. Who said that? What's going on? And then you have to get kind of past that to go, okay, does that align with my goals? Yes, it does. Do I have to change? Maybe if the answer is yes, how do I do that? Well, first, I need to kind of be non-emotive. I have to separate, maybe a story, a narrative that I have in my head versus how I need to act or perform in order to get something accomplished. And I feel like if you do that enough, it becomes a pattern that's easier to get out of your own way to do that. But you can also fall right back into that same pattern that you need an adjustment to go, oh yeah, that's a typical thing I fall into, And so one question I have is, let me just say this, that knowing that about people, because I do, because of family and people I work with and clients and just, in general, people, they're seeking safe place. They're seeking safety. And if they're going to, put their, neck out, it's got to be super important for them to put their neck out. And so that desire to do that and that ability to do that varies greatly with everybody. And there are individuals who love to do it a lot, often. And then there are individuals who don't like to do it at all. And I felt that what I've learned over the years is, don't template my tenacity or my drive or my wanting to stick my neck out or not wanting to stick my neck out over somebody who is executing their job, their work in within their position. So is there anything that you've learned how to navigate that? Like if you have an organization, like we have, where, you've got dozens of people, without offending them or affecting them, you could say, well, you're an X, or a Y or a Z in this organization, meaning you're happy where you are. I'm not going to force you or give you more opportunities that may make you uncomfortable, because you've kind of said that. And then the rub is, they say, well, I want more. I want more. And then you present them with, well, if you accomplish these things, you'll get more, but there's either risk involved, or there's discomfort involved, or there's sacrifice involved. And they go, well, I don't really want to do that, but I do want the reward. And then you've got an agenda with people that you have to kind of navigate. When you're working with organizations, have you been able to help people understand people for that? Because somebody might say they want to be, some position that they're not, and then you lay out the steps, like you said earlier, and then you're actually torturing them, right? They say they want that, but they won't take action for it, and like the lady that you said went in and she was wailing and she, her knees. I mean, if they walked over to her and literally bent her knee back and forth, and did that to her, you're torturing her. She has to do it herself. I'm just real fascinated with finding out about those people, having those people identifying who they are, and then fit with it. And it also happens, I think, within a person's life. You're more risk adverse at a certain age, or you are able to take on risk at a certain age, or have you found that just people are people from the time they're born to the time, they retire? Well, they're just the same person,
Well, you have about 15 questions in
I know.
that statement.
I know. Sorry about that. Yeah.
Let me begin with the end. I think the evidence is that at least somewhere around, some say 52, some say 65% of the nature of our character and personality we come into the world with, and the rest is what happens by virtue of
You think it's
nurture.
only the studies are only 50%?
Well, I'm just telling you the scientific evidence. My observation is that it's more robust than that. But the scientific evidence is, as I said, 52, depending on the study, to 65% is in the wiring. Now, that being in the wiring doesn't mean that's necessarily destined. A person can very intentionally choose to become cognizant of impulses and manage those impulses. It takes a lot of energy and a lot of psychological space to do it, but they can, and depending on the importance of it, they will. What is true, regardless of nature or nurture, 98% of our behavior is automatic.
Mm.
The automaticity of being, whatever the drivers are of that automaticity, is pretty robust. And unless there's some significant force for change, some self-awareness, some environmental condition that requires change, individuals do not tend to change. Now, I don't view the person who comes to me and says, I want to be CFO. And yet, when you look at their accounting performance, it's miserable. You look at how people experience them, they find them arbitrary and capricious and difficult to work with. When you ask them about special projects, they don't want any. They just want to do their bookkeeping. I owe it to them to say, well, let's explore together what it means to go from where you are to a CFO position. And then do that process and explore. I don't view that as torture.
Well,
I view that as,
that part's not torture, but if you then hold them accountable and then say, well,
that's a whole different kettle of fish. But to outline and to say, this is what it's going to take, and this is the journey that you will need to be on, is what I believe to be a responsible thing. I think one of the most difficult conversations as a coach is helping a person realize that their aspiration to be the CEO can never be realized. They're simply not, they don't have the cognitive complexity. They don't have the interpersonal savvy. They have shown none of the capacity to inspire. And there are things they can learn, no doubt, but the chances of them ever landing in the CEO chair is pretty slim. Now, they could become extraordinarily important professionals in their particular discipline or particular expertise. And that can be a huge contribution to business. Now, back into your comment about people and growth and development. It's my view that if an organization truly wants to maximize the talent in the organization, then a cogent, coherent talent system can be achieved, which maximizes the capability of the people in that entity, in that enterprise, whatever its size. On a range of potential, everybody falls somewhere. And by potential, I have very particular parameters for what that is.
I'm going to write that down. In a range of potential, everyone falls somewhere.
And at one end, there are those who have the potential to be what I call the steady performer who learns along and along, is comfortable in their role and satisfied with the contribution they're making, and they seek to fulfill that role in the most meaningful way. On the far, far other end are the absolute high potentials, and there are very few of them. We're talking about the Elon Musks of the world, the people who have capacities, who see things in ways.
Boy, he is a complex, complicated, individual. I mean, he is a unicorn, isn't he? To be that smart, to be that interpersonal, to be that driven.
Yeah.
I mean, how many characteristics does he have that are so unique?
Yeah. Well, he's a very far case of when I say absolute high potential.
Mm-hmm.
If you've ever seen any of the interviews with him on Khan Academy, where he's simply describing a solution to a complex problem, it's elegant, it's complete, it's innovative, it's fresh, and you're thinking, oh my goodness, what a mind do we have sitting in front of us. Now, set aside some of his personality quirks.
Yeah.
That capacity to understand, see, integrate, synthesize, and see the path forward in a confident fashion.
And he's creative.
And he is quite creative. So anyway, on a continuum of potential, we can find where people fall. And the question becomes potential for what? And we can determine that too. We can take a look at where the primary interests are, capabilities, skills, to see, is this person really, their potential is primarily directed toward technical expertise? Is it really more toward operational capabilities and capacities? Is it relational capacities that are exceptional? Is it strategic? And often there's combinations. You find a person who's really, really strategic, has a great relationship capability. Rarely do you find a masterfully strategic leader who's also operationally masterful. Occasionally there's one, but rare. You'll find operational excellence, which also is often grouped with technical expertise and technical excellence that a person may have. I'll give you a ready example. Alan Mulally probably is one of the most strategically remarkable business minds of the last 20 years, who also happens to be extraordinary in his capacity to build relationships and to captivate people in ways that they are deeply inspired to follow his vision of where we're going. Now, he probably would say, well, I'm pretty good operationally too. And I would say, well, you know what the patterns of operational excellence are, and the processes, but you don't know operations like an operations expert does. And he used that strategic and relationship capability to turn forward from bankruptcy to spectacular business success. And we could go through others. I could argue that, Steve Jobs had a strategic mind and a technical mind in a whole variety of ways, but his operational orientation and his relationship capacities were for shit.
Yeah, he was horrible.
He really had to have around him.
I was thinking about him, how he did what he did with his personality, or how he handled people. It's just, that's probably more surprising than what he actually accomplished.
Yes, but remember, when you dig around, you'll see he knew this about himself, and he surrounded himself with people.
I didn't know that.
Who would manage the boundaries and the relationships to get great things done.
There's a great article written by, I think it was Wall Street Journal, but he was a writer for Chiat Day, the agency that came up with the campaign that had Albert Einstein and, the Wright brothers. And it was talking about, we're the crazy ones, but that copywriter wrote that he wrote that almost the first thing he wrote. They presented to Steve Jobs, and Steve Jobs was like, it's crap, get out of here, come back, put some more. And they did about 6 or 7 rounds. And then finally Steve Jobs said, well, I don't know why I keep seeing, more options. The first one was fine. You know, I just think that's a great story about Steve Jobs. And I don't know what to think about that other than was he just like, you know what, that first one was just so good. But I can't tell him how good it was. You know, I have to just, yeah,
Who knows?
yeah.
But the fact is, in everyday life, we have people who intend to do their job the best they can. And by and large, I know there's lots of exceptions to this. By and large, people seek to do their job in a way they believe is going to be effective. Whether or not it is another question. And embedded in your earlier statement, though, is sort of two issues. And this, there's no getting around this. Human beings have a structure for meaning making, and it's a structure which has what I call reference anchors. So one reference anchor is the rules that we should all agree to live by.
Mm.
And often those thinkers are fairly black and white thinkers. They interpret everything from the lens of the rules. And you hear it in their language, in the ways in which they see things. And you know, even a professional who's achieved perhaps some status as a professional, who's adamant that you can only do things XYZ ways, because after all, that's how it has always been done. And there's probably about 45 to 50% of our talent pool who lives in that space. They want to know the rules. They want to know the guidelines. They want to know, teacher, tell me what the absolute answers are, so that I can get it right.
Yeah.
And then there's about 25% who operate in an affiliative anchor point, meaning the people around me, I look to them for guidance on what's likely to be the best way to do this, or the best community for me to operate in that reflects my worldview. And they adjust their attitudes when they begin to see their network beginning to adjust attitudes. They reference meaning by virtue of groups or affinity connections that they have. And then the last two groups, there's what I would call self-aware, my values are clear, I make decisions based on my ideals and values, I'd interpret things from that lens. It's not a black and white thing for me. It is, how do I see experience by virtue of a set of premises I have about the way the world works, which I'm open to change if new evidence reveals itself. And then the last 5% thereabouts operate in the systems orientation. Everything in their world they frame from a systems view. They anticipate unintended outcomes. They expect that's going to be, and prepare themselves for going with the flow of energy to find a path, an emergent path in a presenting problem. And there's just, you know, those references, I have seen people shift over time as they have experience, but not so much. There are those who are what I'll call hardcore rule bound, hardcore affinity bound, very hardcore in their notion of their values and ideals, those subject to testing and hypothesis. And then the systems thinkers can't do it any other way. That's just the way their brain works. They know that there are rules. They know that there are values. They know that there are affinity groups. And there is a integration of that in ways that they sort of hold in tandem while they make sense of something to help find a solution in order to move forward. And it's funny, and executive development with you when you're with a group. You can sit in a room full of 30 people, and in about 10 minutes, you can hear it in the language. Those who are absolutely, completely rule bound, wanting to know the specifics of exactly at 9:05, what are you going to do? And by the way, if you can't answer that question, you're not competent.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then there are those who, how much time am I going to get to spend and enjoy and interact with? And if I can't do that, this isn't worthwhile. And then those who, well, how much feedback am I going to get? And what feedback might be most useful for me? And then those who are looking at it all and looking for, and who are tinkerers, system thinkers or tinkerers. They go tinker with something to see, well, what happens if I push this? And watch how things unfold. And it matters in terms of development plans, because when you're working with a person, if they're rule bound and you say, here are the 5 things you need to do in order to achieve this particular behavior, guess what? If they're motivated learners, they do it.
Yeah. Well,
and then they come back and review it with you and say, here's what I learned, and this is how things have emerged. The systems thinker, you say, well, here's some propositions for you. They go test them back and come back and give you a report. Well, here's what I found. I collected data as I did this, that, and the other. And here's how that worked, and here's what I'm going to act on as I move forward in this process. So in a sense, if you try to impose a strategy on a person whose reference points are different from the strategy, then you wind up with a huge misalignment, missed opportunity, all kinds of disappointments on both sides of the house.
What I love about what you just said is that's kind of why we wrote Pack Creative. Since the 80s, I've said in meetings where, a dozen people, and we were the agency, but it ultimately, the conversation would end up with, there might have been a logistical problem or an IT problem or a product problem, or there are multiple problems. And I've watched and observed how the teams try to figure it out. And what was frustrating for me, I would say, I don't know, 80% of the meetings I sit in have this problem where there's no organization. And when we did Pack Creative, we did these breeds, these dog breeds. It was the personalities were not appreciating their personality and their traits with the other personalities in the room and their trait. So the problem solving would just take forever because there was no movement, because there was no sense of order in the process of solving a problem. It was, you're making me uncomfortable coming up with all those ideas. I need to know the facts, or how are you going to make that work? Or, look, I'm busy. I just want to know what I need to do. Why are we wasting our time? Just somebody tell me what to do. So there are those, and it's just shocking to me that nobody has that process, or at least not a lot of companies that I've worked with had that process. Like, okay, here's how we're going to break this process down to solve these problems. And we all know who we all are. So John, you're going to have to bite your tongue when we're coming up with ideas, because we know you like to implement, and here's the question I have for you. Can somebody who is, as you describe, one of those personalities, can they have the ability to say, well, this is making me uncomfortable, and I know why, because this is my personality type. My time will come when it gets to this point in the problem solving process. Do you see those things roll out when you're working with companies? Because that's exactly why we wrote this book, was to help people understand their breed, their personality, and how it fit in the process. And an example I like to use, if you're a shepherd If you're somebody who likes to check things off your list, you're going to be very uncomfortable when they're spending 2 hours just concepting something. They're wasting your time, and if somebody is trying to shut down the creative process because they just know what's tried and true, there's conflict there. But if you put it so, as you said, and I wrote this down, in a range of potential, everyone falls somewhere. In a process of solving a problem, your personality fits somewhere, but it doesn't fit everywhere. But you can be involved in the process as long as you go, ooh, I got to watch my personality type because it gets freaked out over this part of the process.
Well, to the first part of your question, yes, individuals can become aware of what their tendencies are. And if they're learning Agile, will say, I need to exercise this other muscle in my brain. Now, those who aren't learning Agile and aren't particularly growth-minded figure that it's best just to keep their mouths shut if this isn't a process that they can contribute to. What I try to encourage people to do is, first of all, own what your home base is.
Mm.
If it's a shepherd, if it's a bulldog, if it's whatever it is, own that.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't mean that's always and forever.
Mm-hmm.
It means that as you are in this process now, this is how you're showing up. And be clear about where your particular tendencies can contribute to the process, and make sure you access and use those strengths at the right time. And if you choose to engage in other parts of the process, which I hope you will, you are intentionally making yourself exercise a part of yourself that you've not paid much attention to. So let's use
That's
the
so fun.
example.
That's the good stuff.
Yeah. But you have to want to learn.
Yeah.
People I love the allegory of the cave and how Socrates talks through the movement from shadows to light. But the piece that a lot of people miss is, if you read further into the dialogues, one of the persons talking with Socrates says, "Holy cow, this is a lot of work. It's a lot of work to figure this stuff out." And Socrates says, yeah, you have to love your learning.
Oh, that's so good. I love that. Sorry, my phone keeps going off.
And I would say that is a truth, even in this situation. And let's take, I forget who the orator was. Oh, it'll come to me. He had a lisp. And the way he trained himself is he would put rocks in his mouth and go downstairs in a basement area in Rome and practice giving speeches. And he would have friends listen to him to see if his speech oration was being precise and clear. And he did that to teach himself, knowing it was going to be uncomfortable, knowing this was going to be pushing his limits. But because it was so important to him to learn to be an orator that people could hear without distraction from his lisp, he achieved it and became one of the greatest orators of all time.
I love that story. That's
so
awesome.
I would say the same to us, whether we're bulldog or shepherd. Know what you are, know where you are, and choose to understand that the rules in another part of the space may require you to activate some stuff that you just haven't allowed yourself to do. And even if it is to become the most intense, generous, and focused listener possible in a process that you are not particularly expert in, that's a contribution.
Yeah. How do you create a safe environment so that people feel okay knowing that this is not the area that they best can contribute to. Because the other thing I see is people trying so hard to contribute, to be heard, to try to get, their points across, so they look smart or they look like they're contributing. So I know the answer to this, but I guess you have to create a safe place where people embrace who you are, so that, and protect the weaknesses. That each personality has their strengths and their weaknesses. Do you find that to be true? That we talked about some of these people who are like unicorns. Well, and even we talk about Elon Musk, we talk about Steve Jobs. Those guys have, a weakness. Obviously, they have weaknesses, right? But is that a good thing to point out and to say, here's your strength, we embrace it, we want to elevate it, and here's your weakness, we want to protect it, and we want to work to so you can avoid that part of it.
There are tremendous perils in accentuating the positive, especially for the long-term contribution of an individual. We all have these things that we do naturally with elegance and efficiency, and those things are contributions. But the world changes, the environment changes, and if we aren't busily developing some other aspects of ourselves when those changes occur, we're left behind, we're lost. We now have to play catch up, and that can be really, really, really hard to do. So let's first realize that the whole being brings to the table a huge array of capabilities, most of which they don't understand themselves, and most of which they're unaware of how much other people know about them. And sometimes it's a quick, sometimes slow process of coming to realization that, oh, I actually do that pretty well. And I see that there's this gap that I really need to attend to in order to be ready for the time when that's most needed. And I'll give you a pragmatic example. When I was in college at Wake Forest, everybody had to develop. You couldn't graduate unless you completed a conversational level of a foreign language. And I chose Spanish, and I thought, I'll never use this in my entire life, but it's the one I could do. When I graduated from college, some buddies and I went traveling in Europe, and we got on the wrong train in Spain and got kicked off in the middle of the Spanish desert in a little town called San Juan. And in that little town, there was a Catholic church, a little village around it, a single platform for people to get off the train. We were kicked off the train, and it would be a day and a half before a train of our level was going to come through that we could get on. I was the one who spoke Spanish. I was the one who talked to the priest and negotiated us being able to stay in some part of the church. And it was agreed that we could do that, and they would feed us if we would talk to the boys in the boys' school there in the community and talk to them in English, to teach them some English words. So who knew that Spanish was going to be a capability that I needed for the future? Well, today, to parallel everyday sort of skill issues, we know more about more capabilities and needs than ever before. We know more about the elements of a job than ever before. We have the capability of saying to individuals, if you genuinely, truly want to be blank, then here's the path that will help you get there. And because you might be a bulldog or a shepherd or a terrier, the path for you is going to be different.
Mm-hmm.
And you need not to compare yourself,
Mm-hmm.
but understand the strengths you see in others could be some behaviors that you can develop in yourself to round out yourself.
Mm-hmm.
The huge danger of any coming to say, I'm a shepherd or a bulldog, the huge danger is that you see that as a single-minded way of being.
Mm.
It's a home base.
Okay,
It's a
that's
base
great.
that enables you to say, okay, I get it. This is how I learn. This is how I approach things. This is the way in which I tend to respond. And not but, and I see that to get to this other place where I want to be in my work or my contribution, I need to do the following things. Now, your earlier question was, how do we create a safe space? And part of that is how we facilitate contributions. So if we do not and are not strategic about how we utilize individual talents and use different methodologies to access those perceptions and perspectives, then shame on us as facilitators and managers for not being intentional in saying, okay, look, I know I have this mixture of folk. To get the most from them, I need to try a couple of different strategies. And in some ways, this is a parallel that I would suggest to you could be very helpful in creating safety. Have you ever heard about the red hats, blue hats, black hats, the hat methodology by De Bono out of Harvard?
I don't think so.
No. What De Bono discovered was that because of the way the brain works, if he created an intentional system in which he said, when we're problem solving, we all need to wear different hats at different times. So when you wear the black hat, this is the mindset you need to have.
Mm-hmm.
When you wear the blue hat, here's the mindset you need to have. And what he was trying to do was to say to everybody in the group, there may be a hat you're more comfortable with, but by golly, when we're at different places in this process, we need to make sure that all the hats are activated. And in a sense, we could do that with the packs.
Yeah.
We could say, okay, so here's the bulldog view. I want everybody to step into the bulldog view and tell me what you see.
Right. Yeah, I love that.
Here's the shepherd view. Everybody steps into the shepherd view and tells me what you think on a particular part of the process that we're in.
Yeah.
And by doing it that way, it says everyone's invited to be included and they belong. And even if it's not their particular strong suit, there is something there that can be additive and value added.
Well, I really love that because that is a safe place. And I do love the hat analogy because part of the process is, these are the kind of rules at this stage of the process of thinking. There are no bad ideas. Let's just throw all the ideas for the next hour or two. Let's come up with all the ideas. And then another phase might be editing the ideas, which is a different hat, a different mindset, a different breed, and no matter what breed you are, everybody can participate and you become that separate breed. My wife sent me a Instagram reel with a beaver that somebody had in their house. And that little guy was damming the hallway with stuffed animals and wrapping paper.
Oh my.
I mean, he was being a beaver whether he was in the house or he was outside. So I love that idea that that's your home base, but you can be a bulldog if you're a shepherd. You can be a shepherd if you're a bulldog, because we all have to function that way in life anyway. I'm sure nobody likes to either pay bills. You may not be good at it, but you need to, you know. So we all do things that are, outside our comfort zone, and things we love and things we don't love. So I love that. I love the hat analogy, and I love the um, home base analogy too. Um, if you if you had if you were writing a book about your career, um, and what you've learned, what do you think the title would be?
Imagine.
Oh yeah, I like that. I think mine would be tenacity or flexibility. I think those are two opposite, because I think you have to have tenacity, but you also have to have flexibility. Um,
One of my favorite poets, Emily Dickinson, has lines that resonate in my soul. One line is, "I live in the house of possibility."
Mm.
And indeed, I would say that's true. One of the ways I often end presentations that I do, I quote her. She was asked, why have you written all these little jottings, as some people call them, these little jottings? And she said she did it to ignite the imagination and light the slow fuse of the possible.
Mm.
And I think in much of the work that I do, that's actually what I do, is I ignite the imagination to ignite the fuse of possible within people. And I would even say the Pack Creative is about that. How do I get in touch with my energies in the most productive way that ignites my capabilities to contribute and to make a difference wherever I am in the moment, wherever I am.
What do you think? Go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
What do you think? How do you define creativity, and how do you think it plays in your work, and how does it play in businesses? If I mean, from not creative businesses, but any type of business.
Yeah. David Curtin did work. He's a British psychologist. He did work on creativity some years ago. And he pointed out, and I think I've seen this, I think it's true, that creativity is on a continuum of adaptive creative to innovative creative. The adaptive creative is the person who sees a tweak or twist or adjustment that over time makes a profound difference in the way a product or service is delivered and experienced. The innovative creative is the person who sees something completely new that's never been before, and imagine and is able to describe and help bring that into some form of accessibility, the idea in practice of some form. So I think of creative really is that moment when I even think the act of writing, for example, is very creative, because you're writing something that's never been written before. You are putting together thoughts in a way that's never been done before. You are imagining a way to be that's never been really imagined quite that way before. And there are those who are masterful adaptive creatives. They elegantly make a twist, a tweak, a turn, an adjustment, a slight hue color change, or an angle shift of something. And wow, is like, who knew? that little shift or change was so profound in its impact. So I think of creativity on a continuum, but what is true in all of it is that something has come into being that wasn't there before.
Do you think there's, maybe this is what you just described, and as you described two ways, you know, when I read about writers and artists, so many of them, they push through. They just start and they start putting a word down, or they start drawing, or they start painting. That there's that moment of hardness, or you know, that it's hard and it might be painful and I might be scared, but I'm gonna just push through and do it. And then you get in a flow state. But you have to get in that flow state almost like that's the gate that you always have to cross to be creative, is you have to push through the hard stuff to be creative. And I guess the question for have you, when you've over your years of your career, have you ran across those people who have those processes and identified that, yeah, I just keep pushing through and that's how I end up being creative? Or, you know, is it something you're given, or is it a technique you learn, I guess?
Well, I think it's a little bit of all the above, Todd. I've seen the individual who becomes so immersed in their work that they aren't aware of where they are. They aren't aware of time and place, and they see things that others do not see as a result of the quality of focus. At the same time, I've seen plenty of people who, let's take a programmer, for example. A programmer who is to take an idea and turn that idea into a line of code so that something happens. That's a creative act. They've gotten the message, the idea. Coding happens to be their brush and their ink. Now, they weren't in a state of flow when they did that. They used their knowledge and expertise. They grasped where we needed to go, and they used in this case, their expertise to command the computer to produce an outcome that wouldn't have existed otherwise. So I think there's a lot of both ands here. There's a creative behavior. We tend to undervalue what I might call everyday creativity. We overvalue or overprivilege what we see as exceptional creativity.
Totally agree with that.
And we would do ourselves a favor collectively if we said, you know what, let's celebrate the creative magic spark that makes us human, and celebrate that everyday creativity that really does make the world go and enables us all to achieve things that we couldn't achieve otherwise.
I have to write that down. Celebrate our everyday creativity. I love that. Well, Roger, this has been really fun and I really appreciate it. And thank you so much for joining me today. I'm looking forward to next time we chat, but thanks, Roger. I'll always be in your debt, brother.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to be with you today. It's always a privilege. And until next time, take care of yourself.
Thanks, Roger. You too.